Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kirk Almasian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching this stream on YouTube or on Rumble. And special thanks to our moderator, Red Access, for being present today in the live chat. He says that there is a big suppression in the live chat. Maybe it is because of the topic and how sensitive this topic is for the United States, for the deep state in the United States, for the CIA, for the Pentagon, for the military-industrial complex, for the bankers, who's basically they're really hungry all the time and thirsty for wars, destructions, regime change operations around the world. And this doesn't mean in any way or shape that we endorse all the policies of Iran. However, what we do on this channel, we analyze the complex issues, especially when it comes to an issue related to a foreign policy. And that foreign policy in the United States will have great repercussions, positively or negatively, on the Middle East. My opinion is there is no place where the United States intervened and it led to positive outcome for the local and indigenous people of that region. Now, that being said, we have to be, again, very careful with our analysis when it comes to Iran, because what I see personally, before I go into deep analysis, before I bring geopolitics, before I bring history, before I bring parallels, this reminds me of 2011 and 2012 in Syria, when the rioters have been destroying public properties. They used to go to government buildings, burn them down, block the highways, provoke the police, get shot, and once the cycle of blood starts, and it becomes endless. The situation is probably a little bit different in Iran, because Iran is definitely much stronger, much organized, more ideological, and the people are probably more resilient. And also, Iran is a nation with a great civilization, and all I'm saying is probably the Persians are different from the Syrians. However, I would like to urge my Iranian friends, those who support the Islamic Republic or the Islamic Revolution in Iran, to not underestimate their enemies. You should not underestimate your enemy, its strength, and its creativity in creating havoc in your own country. Therefore, I would like to kindly ask the Iranians and the Persians, those who are following, whether you're with or against, to really carefully listen what I'm trying to say during this show, because I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I'm going to tell you the facts that I believe in bluntly, and at the same time, I will be critical of the US foreign policy, and also I will bring some criticism of the Islamic Republic in Iran. And at the same time, I will try to explain why there are new conditions in the Middle East that could or would compel the political and security elite in Iran to change course or do some behavioral changes within the system itself without being targeted into regime change. So brace yourself for that. That being said, my friends, today I was scrolling on X. The first thing comes to my attention as I woke up in the morning is none other than J.K. Rowling. And she posted this poster on her X account. Basically, this is a poster that says freedom, and there is a woman on the poster trying to burn with a cigarette ashes the picture of Sayyid Ali Khamenei. And she says, J.K. Rowling, if you claim to support human rights, yet can't bring yourself to show solidarity with those fighting for their liberty in Iran, you have revealed yourself. You don't give a damn about people being oppressed and brutalized so long as it is being done by the enemies of your enemies. I would say very interesting. Very interesting statement by J.K. Rowling, who has not said a word in the past 2 years about the Palestinians in Gaza or the women, with thousands of them who were killed and maimed in Gaza. And she received a big backlash, apparently, on her own page. And one of the comments which really caught my attention is our friend Brian Beletic, who says, read the US's own policy papers. Which path to Persia is all about the US starving Iran to death, funding and arming terrorists to destroy it from the inside, making fake deals to frame Iran as the bad guys, and duping the public into accepting repeated US-Israeli strikes on it from abroad. They admit all throughout the document that they need to lie to the public to build consent for regime change, and that the opposition groups they back are not even popular and couldn't exist without constant US support. And if you have no time to read the whole thing, just read the table of contents in the image I provided you below, so you don't even have to open the document. Who funds Brookings? Big oil, pharma, the arms industry, big tech, etc. People who will have a hard time convincing yourself or anyone else that they have our or the Iranian people's best interests or freedom at heart. How can people say they oppose Trump, then spend their time online supporting US regime change Trump himself is openly and loudly promoting? And if you don't read what the US itself says, it says it is really doing in Iran. If you don't have the time, energy, or interest, then why talk about it at all? If you really care, you will put the time in it to learn all of the facts. Now, this is the paper that our friend Brian has been referring to. And this, I have to admit that I have not read this paper before Brian brought this paper into our attention. And I read it. I tried to summarize it. I took some lessons from it. And I want to explain to you in a little bit of a monologue style what this document is about, what the United States strategy is toward Iran, and what I believe is the real situation in the Middle East with Iran and the changing of the circumstances. So nowadays, my friends, when we hear Washington talk about Iran, they talk about diplomacy, they talk about pressure, deterrence, or they also mention nowadays behavioral change. In my opinion, they are usually invited to forget something very important. Like many people have forgotten that this crisis in Iran, this turmoil, didn't start yesterday. And of course, it didn't start with Iran deciding to start building centrifuges. And of course, it didn't only start with anti-Israeli slogans. And in my opinion, it didn't even start with Islamic Republic, which came to power in 1979. Of course, it started in 1953. This is something that, unfortunately, it is missing in the context of the conversation on all mainstream media outlets nowadays. And remember, in 1953, Iran had a democratically elected prime minister. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh, right? And Mohammad Mossadegh's only crime, it wasn't a dictatorship, it wasn't extremism or terrorism, put this all away. His only crime was nationalism, that he wanted to nationalize Iran's oil, and he did, which until then had been effectively controlled by who? British corporations. Remember Venezuela now and what they're doing in Venezuela, and draw parallels yourself with Iran. Of course, when Mossadegh nationalized the oil, what happened in London is panic. Washington, on the other hand, of course, they are embedded with the British interests. Together, the CIA and the MI6 orchestrated one of the most consequential coups in the 20th century. What they did, basically, they bribed politicians, they manipulated newspapers, they mobilized street mobs, and successfully removed Mossadegh. And they brought back the Shah. The Shah was restored. He was stronger than before. Now he has the backing of the MI6 and the CIA. And Iran reinserted itself by force and manipulation and psyoping and intel work into the Western security order again, just like what happened in Syria now. Draw the parallels. So by the way, Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, was also part of this emerging architecture in Iran. Iran, under the Shah, was not an enemy of Israel. It was, let's say, a quiet partner. The oil flowed to these corporations. Intelligence flowed the cooperation with Israel, just like Jolani is doing nowadays. And Iran was supposed to be stable, obedient, and profitable for this, let's say, Western American, British, Israeli interests. However, this is the point. What followed the coup is just as important as the coup itself. Because the Shah didn't rule Iran as a constitutional monarch. He rather ruled it as a police state backed, trained, and protected by Western intelligence services, just like Jolani. The infamous security apparatus under Shah was called Savak. And this Savak was not an Iranian invention, by the way. It was modeled, trained, and refined with foreign assistance by the Americans and the Brits. So what we had in Iran, torture, surveillance, disappearances, and censorship, those were the rules in Iran, right, under the Shah. This is the democracy that Americans and the Brits brought to Iran. This detail matters because it crushed every secular, nationalist, and liberal alternative inside Iran. Right? So when people talk today and ask why Iran didn't become a normal democracy, here is your answer. Here are the factors. Every time Iranians tried to organize politically outside the palace of Shah, they were crushed, they were detained, they were tortured. So over time, mosques became the only spaces where the state could not fully penetrate. So religion didn't radicalize Iranians' politics on its own. Repression of the Shah forced politics into religion. This was the equation back then. So by the time 1979 arrived, the question was no longer reform versus revolution. Reform had been strangled decades earlier. The only remaining language of mass mobilization was religious, moral, and absolute. The Islamic Revolution was not just about faith. It was about reclaiming dignity in a system where dignity had been systematically denied for the Iranian people. So that coup d'etat of the US and Britain and Israel did something irreversible to Iranian political consciousness. And this is something that is the psychological factor that is again missing when we talk about Iran. This coup taught Iranians that elections were meaningless. Elections were meaningless if they crossed Western interests, right? That sovereignty was conditional, that reform could be vetoed from Uncle Sam and in London and in Tel Aviv. And when you humiliate a society like that, especially a nation like Iran, and I have to reiterate on this, that Iran is a nation with great civilization. Syria was a construct after its independence from first the Ottoman Empire and then from the French, but there was no Syria as a nation in the past, a kingdom. Persia was. This historical experience and accumulation gives a different type of consciousness to the Persian people compared to the people who lived in Syria. And in Syria, we were unfortunately tribes, we were unfortunately anything but a nation. Let's not focus on Syria today. So when you basically tell the Iranians that your vote doesn't count and that democracy is meaningless and that sovereignty is conditional and whatever you vote, it is us who decide for you from abroad through our proxy, the Shah, you basically radicalize the people. You radicalize the people in Iran. So the 1979 Islamic Revolution, it wasn't like an irrational explosion. It was basically simply a delayed answer to the 1953 coup d'etat. It was the rejection of foreign domination wrapped in religious language because religion was the only space not fully colonized by the state. Now, here is the part that Western narratives usually skip, especially on the mainstream press. At the beginning, Washington did not immediately, by the way, see Khomeini as an existential enemy. There were voices inside the American intelligence and policy community who believed Khomeini could be managed. In Washington, D.C., they assumed he could stabilize Iran, calm the streets, and eventually normalize relations with the US again. But they were catastrophically wrong. And part of Washington's failure was analytical arrogance, like they do usually. American intelligence has a long history of misunderstanding religious authority outside the Western experience. They assumed in Iran that clerics function like church figures in Europe, like they're symbolic, conservative, and ultimately subordinate to the state. But Khomeini was not a priest seeking accommodation. He was, according to Iranians and many Shias around the world, a revolutionary theorist who fused theology with anti-imperialist politics. His legitimacy didn't come from institutions. It came from the streets, from the people who protested and demonstrated and did the revolution. And that kind of legitimacy cannot be negotiated away with recognition or concessions, right? So the CIA, in my opinion, mistook the Iranian revolution for a bargaining position. They thought that ideology would often soften once power was achieved, right? Instead, unfortunately for the Americans, this power in Iran hardened the ideology, right? From that moment on, both sides became prisoners of their own logic. Washington could not tolerate the Iranian defiance, and Tehran couldn't survive submission. So when you misunderstand the nature of your opponent's legitimacy, conflict becomes like just a very natural consequence, right? And unfortunately for all the sides, the relationship from that moment on was structurally doomed. And remember what happened just after the Islamic Revolution, the Iran-Iraq War, right? This war is constantly misrepresented, and probably deliberately. Saddam Hussein didn't simply wake up one morning and invade Iran on a whim, by the way. He was encouraged, urged, armed, financed, and politically protected by the United States of America and its allies. Imagine Saddam Hussein used even chemical weapons against Iran. Americans shared intelligence with Saddam Hussein, and Washington made sure that Iraq would not lose this war. At the same time, and this is where, by the way, history becomes inconvenient, Iran also received covert support from who during the Iraq-Iran war in the 80s? From Israel. But not out of love for the Khomeini, but out of strategic calculation. Israel still viewed Iraq as the greater threat at the time in the 80s. So both sides were fed enough weapons to keep killing each other, but never enough to win. And what we had as a result of this war, 1 million people dead, no decisive victory for any of these conflicting sides, which is a perfect imperial outcome. However, the psychological legacy of that war still shapes Iranian strategy today. Remember, chemical weapons were used against Iranian soldiers and civilians, often with Western silence or complicity. Entire cities were scarred. Entire families were erased, and the international system that claimed to uphold norms basically did nothing. This experience, my friends, created a permanent trauma inside Iranian strategic thinking. It taught Tehran that international law is nothing but a decoration, like the map behind me. They taught the Iranians that treaties do not stop getting bombed by chemical weapons. It taught them that moral outrage doesn't save lives. This is why Iran became obsessed with deterrence. Deterrence, deterrence, deterrence. This is why Iran invested in missiles, invested in the allies that the Americans called them proxies, and regional debt. Not out of some crazy madness or craziness, but out of a learned conviction. If you cannot deter your enemies, they will test how far they can go. So once a society internalizes that lesson, it never fully unlearns it. This is what I'm trying to say about the Iranian people, this collective consciousness and the lessons they have learned from the past. Unlike the Syrians who learned nothing, basically, from the past experiences. Anyways, out of this Iraq-Iran war, Iran emerged traumatized but strategically transformed. The lesson for the Iranians was that never be isolated again, never fight alone again, and never rely on international law again. This is where Iran's regional strategy was born, right? And this strategy basically has been accelerated from the year 2000s onwards as Iran built what became known as the so-called axis of resistance. And this axis was not just military, it was also ideological. It was based on the idea that resistance to American and Israeli domination could transcend sectarian lines. And this is why Iran allied with who? Even Sunni movements in the region, including in Palestine, such as Islamic Jihad and Hamas. And this was not because of theology, but because of shared opposition to Israel, US, meaning the occupation. This explains the relationship with groups that are so different from Iran, which I'm personally against it, but this is what Iran has been doing, and this is why I'm trying to explain the Iranian position in this case. In any ways, Iran expanded its influence through this axis of resistance to Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen. And the US basically failed to stabilize Iraq. Maybe that wasn't even the goal. So they didn't stabilize, let's say. Israel failed to defeat Hezbollah in the year 2006, and Iran appeared to be a winning side of history, right? Everybody thought that Iran is winning this long strategic race against Israel and the United States in the region. But even at its height, the so-called axis of resistance carried internal contradictions. For example, ideological unity, for example, was often assumed rather than earned, right? Like, for example, organizational loyalty was mistaken for popular legitimacy. Tactical victories were treated as proof of long-term sustainability. But over time, the axis of resistance became excellent at surviving pressure, but less capable of adapting to change. This is the criticism for the axis of resistance, by the way, because I believe that this axis relied heavily on symbolism, relied on memory, and relied on moral narrative, while underestimating how deeply sectarian counter-revolution had penetrated the region. Remember, my friends, any resistance around the world can inspire people inside this region and outside that region, right? But inspiration without renewal becomes ritual. And rituals without results eventually collapse under its own weight. So ideology only works as long as it delivers results. If there is no results, ideology starts to crumble. And here comes October 7. This is very important, my friends. I hope I'm not boring you with this monologue, but this is very important in my opinion. And October 7 was a rupture. Not because of rhetoric, not because of slogans, not because of consequences. October 7 functioned as a stress test for the entire axis of resistance, right? So-called. And this stress failed for the axis of resistance has failed. Or the axis has failed in this test. Not because the cause was unjust, but because escalation control collapsed. The escalation dominance has collapsed and deterrence also collapsed. Symbolic resistance collided with overwhelming force by the Israeli and the American side, and the Axis had no credible way to impose costs proportionate to the destruction inflicted upon the Axis. Many people started saying deterrence has become nothing but a rhetoric. And it is not. Deterrence is not about rhetoric. Deterrence is about the enemy's belief that escalation will be punished in kind. And when Gaza was completely destroyed, tens of thousands of Palestinians were murdered. When Hezbollah's leadership was decapitated, including the Secretary General of Hezbollah, which cannot be replaced, and nobody can convince me otherwise. And if you are aware by the whereabouts of Hezbollah and its new Secretary General, well, I'm sure you agree with me that this has been one of the biggest downgrades in the history of the histories. I'm sorry. Sheikh Naim Qasim cannot replace and cannot fill the shoes of Hassan Nasrallah. Impossible. Neither politically, strategically, militarily. You can't simply compare with them, between them, my friends. This is a huge difference. Anyways, we had a situation where Gaza is destroyed, tens of thousands of people were murdered. The deal on Gaza was imposed through the UN Security Council. Hezbollah's leadership has been decapitated, including the Secretary General. Syria has gone completely into the hands of the Americans, the Turks, and the Israelis. This regime change which happened recently. So when red lines were crossed without decisive retaliation, the aura of deterrence dissolved completely. And the limits of the project basically were revealed in real time to the enemy of the Axis, and that is Israel. So the destruction of Gaza, my friends, was not only, in my opinion, a humanitarian catastrophe, right? It was a strategic defeat for the entire Axis. Hezbollah's leadership was systematically decapitated. Iran's deterrence posture was exposed as limited. And most importantly, the removal of Bashar al-Assad, regardless of how it was framed, effectively severed the geographical and logistical backbone of the Axis. Without Syria, there is no coherent Axis. And here we must be brutally, brutally honest. Iran's failure, my friends, was not only due to American or Israeli pressure. It was also due to counter-revolutionary forces inside the region, heavily supported by Washington and its partners. For decades, we had Saudi Arabia and Qatar spending billions of dollars into exporting sectarian and takfiri ideologies into the region. Entire generations were taught that unity with Shia forces was betrayal. Resistance was reframed as heresy. Anti-imperialism was replaced with sectarian hatred. And I can assure you, and if you're a Lebanese, Syrian, Palestinian, and you are truly a critical person, you know that what I'm telling you now is the truth. Because this poison has spread everywhere in the region, this poison of sectarianism. And this poison of sectarianism has also spread even within the Palestinian society. Even among people living under occupation now in Gaza, there are influential voices. And I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry to say this, but those are influential voices living in Gaza, and they openly despise Iran and Hezbollah. And they celebrate Jolani. And there is no other reason for doing that except for sectarian hatred. And if you want to know more about this sectarian hatred, I encourage you to go on X and search what the brother of Abu Ubaidah, the spokesperson for Qataib al-Qassam, has been tweeting on X about Iran, about Hezbollah, about the Shias in general, calling them Rawafid, and about Jolani. Everything will be clear when you go and do that small, very quick research. What the brother of Abu Ubaidah thinks about the axis of resistance, basically. And these voices, basically, in my opinion, they have just shot themselves in the leg. And this also explains and tells us how successful the counter-revolution has been in the region. Now, I want to just focus on one more thing, and this is extremely important, my friends, and I think this is also missing in the conversation about Iran. And that factor is Turkey. Turkiye, as our Turkish friends like me to call Turkiye, but I'm still calling it Turkey. My friends, with the removal of Assad, a geopolitical vacuum opened in the heart of the Levant. And Turkey moved quickly to fill this vacuum. In northern Syria, Turkish military presence expanded under the language of security zones. And remember, just last week, they have this war in Aleppo, in Sheikh Maqsoud and Ashrafiyeh, was Turkey's war against the Kurds, because this is part of the plan of the Balkanization of Syria, that Turkey takes over Aleppo and they cannot tolerate the Kurdish presence there in exchange for Israel taking over the south. This is part of the greater deal between Turkey and Israel. They are cooperating in carving up Syria. In Iraq, Turkish forces entrenched themselves deeper, striking, occupying, and normalizing permanent footprint. And most importantly, in the South Caucasus, on the borders of Iran, the victory of Azerbaijan over the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh was not simply an Azeri success, it was a geopolitical triumph of pan-Turkism. Now, can you believe, if you have any political and geopolitical understanding, the ABC, not even more, the ABC of geopolitics, how can you, as an Iranian official or politician, support the Azeri takeover over Nagorno-Karabakh? Even our friend, Sayyid Muhammad Marandi, who was a respectable guest on our show, has been supporting the Azerbaijani takeover of Nagorno-Karabakh. How can you support the demise of your own influence in that region? I just activated the comments. I forgot to activate it on the screen. Somebody says, I love Kevork, but he seems artificial lately. Maybe, in your opinion, I'm artificial. If you're more in depth than myself, I encourage you to make a YouTube channel and be deeper than Syriana Analysis and myself. That would be my my advice to you, or I encourage you to do that. Anyways, as you see, Turkey has entrenched its influence in the Levant and in the Caucasus. So from northern Syria to northern Iraq, we have a continuous pan-Turkic arc, and this arc is taking shape also on the borders with Iran. And sooner or later, and I said this in the past, Iran will be forced to confront a reality it has tried to postpone. And I don't know why. And this arc cuts directly across Iran's northern frontier. This arc threatens Iran's access routes. This arc challenges Iran's influence in the Caucasus. This arc introduces a rival civilizational project backed by NATO power. And here is what makes Turkey fundamentally different from Israel in Iran's long-term calculus. Israel is a contained adversary, but Turkey is an expanding one. Turkey is actively reshaping the map here in the region close to the Iranian borders. While Iran's revolutionary project is fatigued, Turkey's pan-Turkic vision is energetic, and they still feel victorious from the regime change in Syria. This pan-Turkic vision is demographic, economic, linguistic, and military, by the way. And rest assured that Turkey is advancing quietly, often under Western tolerance, sometimes under Western cover. Remember, just yesterday, 2 days ago, Ursula von der Leyen was in Damascus. Meanwhile, the Jolani forces were massacring the Kurds in Aleppo. Does Kevork know his picture is freezing? I didn't know that my picture is freezing, to be honest with you. But do you hear me well? Like, even if the picture is frozen, do you guys hear me well? Can you please maybe tell me if my voice is also frozen, I should probably change the cable. Yes, we still hear you. Great. Audio is perfect. Okay. Do you have 20 seconds? I could change the cable of my webcam, and I think that would fix the problem. Is that okay with you guys? Can you give me like 20 seconds? Yeah, just a second. I think it shouldn't frozen now because this could be from the cable, by the way. The cables I'm using for the webcam, sometimes they are, I don't know, not the best, probably. So the Donald is still a so I don't know if my picture would be frozen again. I don't think it will be frozen, but just in case. So, as I said, my friends, Turkey feels energetic now after its victory in Syria, and it is expanding its project, which has different layers: demographic, economic, linguistic, and military. And they're doing it quietly, often under Western tolerance, just like happened now in Aleppo with the ethnic cleansing, basically, of the Kurds from Sheikh Maqsoud and Ashrafi. And this is all planned. They are balkanizing Syria, and they're carving up Syria between Turkey and Israel. My friend, you have to decide whether I'm being superficial or I'm being great. Sometimes I really laugh when people say things about me, but anyways, everybody has the free to hold an opinion. So Turkey, unlike Iran, is becoming a regional empire now. And for Iran, this should represent a deeper challenge than any Israeli airstrike, because it threatens its borders, it threatens its corridors, it threatens its influence, and it threatens its identity. Pan-Turkism, by the way, doesn't need to defeat Iran militarily. Pan-Turkism only needs to surround Iran strategically, right? And this is where American strategy becomes more sophisticated, because Washington doesn't want Turkey to become a dominant either. And this is very, very important, my friends. I truly hope that I would be able to explain to you this correctly. While the Americans are often tolerating the Turkish expansion in the region, but at the same time, they don't want for Turkey to become overstretched or become unbeatable, undefeated empire, right? And they don't want any player in the region to become completely dominant. The Americans want to divide and conquest. They can move Turkey on the chessboard in Syria. They can move it on the chessboard against Iran. But at the same time, they don't want for things to go out of hand, right? A Turkey that stretches from the Adriatic to Central Asia is not it becomes a problem. So what does the empire do when two regional powers compete? You remember the Iran-Iraq war. We just addressed it in today's stream, right? So what does the American do? They either turn them against each other or they try to balance them. In my opinion, they are going to try to balance them in this case. And this is the incentive structure quietly being placed in front of the Iranian elite. This is what the Americans are, I assume, they're proposing now as we speak, while they are rioters destroying public properties, and there are protesters, peaceful of them, and also you have people demonstrating for the government in Iran. Put this all away. Those are all smoke screens, right? While we speak, I assume that the Americans are presenting deals to the Iranian political and security deal. And they're telling them, if you recalibrate, if you abandon the revolutionary mission without collapsing the state, then Iran can be repositioned as a counterweight to Turkey, but not as a revolutionary pole, but as a stabilizing one. So in other words, even the United States needs Iran. The United States of America needs Iran now as a counterweight to Turkey. But not the Iran of Khomeini, not the Iran of a permanent resistance against the American dominance, but an Iran that contains Turkey, stabilizes the periphery, and accepts limits. This is where American strategic thinking becomes clear, my friends, because from Washington's perspective, behavioral change is cheaper than regime change. Chaos in Iran is very unpredictable. It could completely destroy everything that the Americans tried to establish, including the Zangetso corridor on the northern borders of Iran. So for the Americans, they want to copy, probably, I'm saying, or I would assume, they will try. I'm not saying they will succeed. They will try. This is their strategy. This is their thinking, to do something like in Venezuela, right? Will they be successful or not? I don't think they will be successful in the current circumstances in the near future. I don't think so. But what comes after Khamenei? This is the serious question. We will see how things will work out for Iran. Now, so when you see this situation and equation, it seems that the Americans want to strip away the revolutionary mission of Iran redirect Iran's energy toward regional balancing, especially against Turkey, but keep the state institutions intact, not complete destruction and chaos like happened in Syria, like the situation in Venezuela. So in this framework, Iran is not an enemy to be erased completely. It is, in the eyes of the Americans, it's a problem to be managed. And that is the incentive quietly placed, in my opinion, or I assume this is what the Americans are trying to do now in front of the Iran's elites. This is what they're proposing them, in my opinion, or I assume. They're telling them, you can survive by adapting, or you could resist. And there will be, of course, bloodshed, because I don't think that the Americans and the Israelis are going to back off and allow for Iran to stay a resistant country and continue on the same path without military strikes. Iran could survive. Iran could hit or give a strong blow to the Israelis and the Americans. Probably they have surprises. I don't know. Maybe they have, I don't know. Maybe they go nuclear. Nobody knows what could happen now in Iran. Well, all I'm saying is that the Americans will not back off now without strikes against Iran if Iran decides to stay revolutionary or resistant country for the American dominance in the region. So that's why I say to my Iranian friends, those who support the Iranian revolution, Islamic revolution in Iran, do not underestimate the Americans and the Israelis. So American strategists apparently want quick behavioral change, but in my opinion, even if the Iranian elite now decide that they want to do some changes, the delivery of the change will be slow. They cannot really do a U-turn between one day to another. This is not how politics work. This is what Trump is, if Trump is expecting from Iran to do like a quick 180-degree U-turn, that's not going to happen. They need time, they will deliver it slowly, but it seems that the Americans want something quick. So this is where we are, my friends. It doesn't look like we are on the verge of an all-out invasion of Iran, and it doesn't look like we are on the verge of peace. But it seems that in a long transitional moment where Iran is being pressured to abandon its revolutionary identity while keeping its state intact, right? So whether Iran can navigate this without tearing itself apart is a really serious question. But as I tried to explain in today's monologue, basic history already taught Iranians one brutal lesson in 1953. And I hope that the Americans can put this in their mind when they are trying to make decisions about Iran. Because the 1953 led, and the response to it was 1979. And if they try to do something like in 1953, rest assured, a decade or two later, there will be another wave of anti-American and anti-Israeli movement in Iran that would probably be much more radical, between quotations, than the Islamic revolution it is nowadays. So I think this was an important context to understand what happened in Iran and what could happen in the future. Now, I wanted to show you lots of things for today. However, there are lots of propaganda material nowadays on X. I will show you a few of them. Like, they're using women nowadays for regime change propaganda, as you saw J.K. Rowling, for example, at the beginning. And this is another chick.
To the people of Iran, you are winning. This is crucial. The regime want to convince you that you're not. They've cut off your internet. Thank God for Starlink, which is helping.
By the way, this Starlink that Elon Musk has turned on the protesters in the rioters in Iran, why hasn't he also gave Starlink to the Palestinians in Gaza? He gave it to the Venezuelan opposition. He gave it to the Iranian opposition, but he never gives something like free internet to the Palestinians in Gaza. Isn't that telling? Anyways, I was just trying to show you some of these chicks that they are recruiting apparently on social media platforms to basically.
I have a short message for those who are calling the national revolution of Iranians a Mossad or CIA chaos in Iran. I'm an Iranian, and as an Iranian, I would like to tell you, fuck you, political prostitutes. We don't need you in our camp. Keep Iran out of your filthy mouths, you terrorist supporters. You cannot strip Iranian of agency. Get the fuck out of here.
I'm not shocked by this content. And then we learned that this woman is not an Iranian anyways. I hope that our friend with access is being sarcastic about this, because this is so cringe. Guys, don't listen to such people, whether you hate your regime or not in Iran. These hysterical people, these people who will not bear the consequence of anything happening in the country, because most of them are outside the country, like this one. Like this is, you know, in Arabic we say shufuni. Like these people like attention, right? This is not how politics is made, and this is not how national interests are preserved. These people are completely tards. Yes, as our friends, these people are completely tards. Please, like, don't know what they're doing. People like this, people like her have destroyed my entire country, right? Entire nation, civilization, and then they didn't even get freedoms. And after what they got, like Jolani, they're like, oh my God, we didn't know this was going to happen. It's like, we were telling you for 14 years. We were telling you for 14 years. How is it possible that you're against a dictatorship in Iran because you say Khamenei is a dictatorship and that you're against this regime, etc. But at the same time, you support Reza Pahlavi. Like, is he going to bring democracy or is he going to bring a kingdom? You remember under his father what happened? Suppression, dictatorship, killings, disappearances, detained, political prisoners everywhere. You cannot really claim that you're pro-democracy and at the same time be with the Shah, right? Another chick who went viral again. Like, you see how they use these chicks nowadays?
از اون ور
What is this? Seriously, man. What is this? What is this? And apparently this woman is, by the way, is in Canada. It's not even in Iran. This video was filmed in Toronto, Canada in 2022, not in Iran during current protests. Iranian women in Iran are with them ongoing protests. Anyway, this is not even new, but it's been circulated again on social media platforms. What to say? Just finally wanted to bring your attention, my friends, that there is a big Israeli influence operation aiming to install Pahlavi as Shah of Iran. And this is not from an Iranian outlet. This is the Haaretz. This is the Israeli newspaper. While Pahlavi enjoys some popularity among the Iranian expat community, it is far from clear that Iranians want him as a leader. In light of the findings by Haaretz and the Marker is the Haaretz's business newspaper, it turns out that a large-scale digital influence campaign in Persian was underway, operated out of Israel, and funded by a private entity that receives government support. The campaign promotes Pahlavi's public image and amplifies calls for restoring the monarchy. The campaign relies on avatars, fake online personas, posing as Iranian citizens on social media. They were first discovered by social media researchers in Israel and abroad. According to 5 sources with direct knowledge of the project, native Persian speakers were recruited for the operation. 3 of the sources confirmed the connection between the project and this specific campaign and said they witnessed the network advancing pro-Pahlavi messaging. According to the sources, the campaign included fake accounts on platforms such as X and Instagram and used artificial intelligence tools to help decimate or disseminate key narratives, craft its messages, and generate content. This is not me, this is the Haaretz. So the video is good now. I think it was because of the cable, as I told you, my friends. Anyways, this Riza Pahlavi, I watched his video, and to be honest with you, this guy is very mediocre. And his father, at least, he was way smarter than him. He was more charismatic. He used to, you know, I watched his interviews. He looks like he understands what he's talking about, whether you agree with him or not. This guy is a complete clown. This guy has not even worked a job in his entire life. He didn't even have to work, you know. It's a clown show. It's a clown show. Anyways, I tried to explain to you guys the geopolitics of the Middle East and especially from the gate of Iran. If you like this content, I would really appreciate you if you hit the like button, like thumbs up, and subscribe to Syriana Analysis. I'm putting lots of work in this. I would really appreciate it if you could reward me with a like and subscription to Syriana Analysis. And if you like to support the independent work I'm doing here, there are different means in the description below. But also, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. And if you're watching this on your couch, on the TV, you can scan this QR code and it would send you to the Patreon page. With your support, this work continues. This is an independent channel with no financing from any side, non-governmental or governmental, no one. This is just your support. This is the AdSense of YouTube, and this is the patrons of Syriana Analysis. بنحبك كيفوك من سوريا دمشق حبيب قلبي. والله انتوا على العين والراس، انتوا اللي عم تعانوا اكثر شيء بالبلد. الله يعيننا، ما بعرف شو بدي اقول. My friends, thank you so much for tuning in, whether you watch this on YouTube or on Rumble, and special thanks to our moderator Red Access for being present today and moderating this live chat under suppression. I appreciate you all. Tomorrow I invited an Iranian expert. She is outside of Iran. She dislikes the Iranian government. And at the same time, she doesn't want for the United States and Israel to take over her country. That would be an interesting conversation if she could join us. I have sent her the invite. So we will see if she can. Okay. So she cannot, unfortunately, come tomorrow, but I will try my best to invite Iranians to speak with them. Okay. Peace be upon you, upon your families, my friends. Salam.